So I'm from Northern Alberta, in Canada. Some of you that follow me on social media, the social media that I have left, I'm banned on everything all the time. But some of you that follow me know that that's kind of what I do. I advocate for things that I believe in, right? So I want everybody here, first off, I want to make this very clear. Normally when social media advocates come from North America, they come here, they tell you guys all the things you're doing wrong, right? They make sure that you understand that Israelis are terrible, social media, and bad PR. And I'm not going to do that, because there are people here tonight that are from Israel that do social media and do PR and they do an excellent job. The problem are not those people. The problem is your government, and the problem is a very lackadaisical attitude towards what's happening on social media. Right? It's not that you guys are doing a bad job, it's just that some of you aren't doing any job. Some of you are doing a great job. But you got to kind of get an aggregate of all of it, and then you realize, okay, there's so much more we could be doing, right? The biggest problem that I see isn't you. The biggest problem is the ignorance that most people have about Jews, right? And I'm speaking from experience. I'm speaking as somebody who never met a Jewish person until I was 24 years old, right? And if I did, I didn't know, right? So that's on them, really, just as much as it was on me. But I want you guys to understand that there is a profound ignorance about Jews in the non-Jewish community. So why does that matter, and why am I going to be talking about some things that sometimes I'm going to say stuff and you're probably going to think to yourself, well, that's common sense. Or you're going to think, well, of course, everybody knows that. But it's not common sense. Not everybody knows that. So anyway, I'll start off by explaining Indigenous status, what it means, why I started talking about it, why I feel like it's an underused weapon in our quiver, and it's something that all of us need to understand better so that we can use it better. Because one of the biggest issues with understanding the Indigenous argument is you have a lot of people that don't really understand it, and they use it, and then they actually end up delegitimizing the argument itself, because it's very hard to argue from an Indigenous perspective and then argue without an Indigenous perspective, okay? And I'll explain that. So I'm Native, right? I'm Native Canadian, I'm Métis. So my people are from a place called the Red River in Manitoba, all right? Now, Indigenous status is site-specific. What does that mean? It means that Indigenous people have a specific place where they're from, a specific place where their stories happen, a specific place where they became a people, okay? I shouldn't have to explain to people, especially here of all places, where that is for Jews. But unfortunately, when I'm giving these talks in North America, a lot of times I have to clarify when I'm talking about it. By the way, I'm talking about Israel in your case, right? It's actually sad that I sometimes have to explain that. I don't have to explain that to you guys here. I mean, you walk out your door and you're literally on the way of the patriarchs. Like everything, all of your major stories happen here. Because this is not just the ancestral homeland of the Jewish people. You're living in the ancestral heart, right? Most people don't understand that. So when they come here, or don't come here, they don't even really understand what they're missing, okay? That's something we have to change. That's something everybody in this room can help change. So when you're talking about where you live, you can talk about, so yesterday I was down, like Ishai can tell you, the Tomb of Jesse, you can go to Machpelah. I mean, you can go to places that are so significant to Jews that it just doesn't really need explanation. But then there are Jews that do need that explanation, and we have to take the time to explain it to them. Otherwise, you end up with the idiots from If Not Now. Right? Those are the Jewish people that think that New York City is as important as Israel to Jews. And they literally tell kids that. And the sad thing is, there are American Jewish kids that hear that message, and it resonates with them. Why? Because they're in New York. And they don't really want to go to Israel. Israel's hard. Israel's dirty, and there's like people there that aren't nice to them. So they immediately latch on. They say, oh yeah, I like the idea that New York is more important because I'm comfortable with it. Right? And comfort is the enemy of identity. So the more comfortable you are, the more likely you are to give up other things that are important to maintain that level of comfort. So anyway, I told you I was going to talk about Indigenous status. I want everybody to hold up your left hand, just really quick. Now, each of your fingers is like a piece of your Indigenous identity. And it's an important piece, because just like a hand, these fingers all work together to make something happen. Without fingers, you can't pick things up, right? So now, Language, land, culture, blood, spirituality. Now, why do I say spirituality is the thumb? Because just like the thumb on your hand, it makes all of the other fingers work together, right? Now, that makes some people really uncomfortable because they're like, oh, are you saying I have to be religious? No. I'm saying you have to at least understand the spirituality of your people, right? So now, when all of these things work together, they give you a functional hand. Just like all these things working together will give you a functional identity. Now, if I start taking these fingers away, right, and this happens a lot, so you say you lose connection with your ancestral land. I mean, I don't know any people that that's ever happened to, right? Like, you know, people that maybe were exiled from their ancestral homeland, that goes away. What about people that don't speak their language and they actually turn it into a ceremonial language for centuries and they speak the local language, but they don't speak their own language except for religious purposes? You know, does anybody here know people that happen to? Right? What about the people that are taken away from their families so they no longer have their blood connection, so maybe they don't even know who they are? So all of a sudden we start looking now, what about the people that don't know anything about their own people's spirituality? What about those people who are so distanced from who they are that they have no idea how their people interact with the Creator? So now what happens? What do you have? Is that a hand? No, it's a stump. And you can't pick things up with a stump. But unlike a hand, you can regrow fingers. Now, you can regrow your fingers with your identity. I mean, Israelis will probably figure out how to regrow fingers and don't bring it past. But, and when they do, then I'll have to change my thought. But the truth of the matter is, in reality right now, you can't regrow the fingers on a hand, but you can for your identity. So you can regain a language and speak it as a daily use language, even if it's been out of regular use for centuries. You can return to your ancestral land and achieve self-determination. You're the only indigenous people in the history of the world that have been exiled from your ancestral land. And I already hear, I know somebody's going to make, well, some of us never left, I'm aware. The truth is, though, as a group, you were exiled. You return and you achieve self-determination on your ancestral land. Now, you could argue that you don't have full self-determination over your own ancestral land, and that's something I'll talk about in a little bit. Because it's a problem, right? It's a problem that you don't have full control of the temperament. And not maybe for the reasons you might think. And I'm not speaking from a religious perspective. I'm speaking strictly from a common sense perspective. But I'll get into that after. So when we're talking about indigeneity, the reason that it's so vital, the central argument right now that is used to demonize Jews all over the world, not just in Israel, is that you're foreign, European, white colonizers who stole poor, pitiful brown people's land, right? And as patently ridiculous as that is, people believe it. Now, I can't tell you why they believe it, but you need to understand that they do, right? Even when all the evidence is against it, even when I would say a vast majority of the world has grown up with the Christian tradition and they've read the Bible, and even they even call their own guy, they call him Jesus Christ, King of the Jews, right? So they call him that, and yet they will deny that there's a Jewish connection here. And we make jokes about it. Look, we joke all the time because they'll make a stupid statement like the Jews are trying to Judaize Jerusalem, right? It doesn't even make sense. It's rank stupidity. It's literally like saying the Jews are trying to make the Jewish club too Jewish. It makes no sense to anybody with a brain. Oh, there's no word. Good job. So the problem that we have. What's that?
Yeah, whatever.
Okay, thanks. Of course I should have put that. So the problem that we have is that we're fighting a battle sometimes we don't even realize we're fighting, right? So one of the things that I try to get everybody to do is just to pay attention, right? If you follow me on social media, you'll know that I say that a lot. I say, like people will say, well, Ryan, how did you know that? I'm like, because I pay attention, right? When I started doing this stuff, I didn't start talking about Israel because I thought it was cool. After I started paying attention, I realized, wait a second, there's a group of indigenous people who have achieved national self-determination, which is the goal of every indigenous people across the planet. So I saw you guys and I thought to myself, okay, what can I learn from these people? I mean, aside from, how to make bagels and make really bad jokes sometimes with puns like Gabriel and nonstop coffee. But, I learned this stuff because I was paying attention. And so one day I was talking to my dad, and I said to him, I was like, you know, I think I'm going to go to Israel. There's this lady from an organization called SelfDetermination that offered to send me on a trip.
What's the name of the organization?
SelfDetermination.
Stand with us.
They do some
Stand
good
with us, Lord. Stand
Yeah, they do some good stuff. So I told my dad I think I'm going to go to Israel, and it's funny, because I used to be a two-stater, right? I know it's hard to believe now, especially if you follow me on social media, you'll be like, dude, you're like so anti, because I call it a two-state delusion. It's not a solution, it's a delusion. And I was one of those people, and I believed it. I thought that that's the only fair way to do it. So one day I'm talking to my dad, and he said to me, it's funny, I can't swear because we're in a shul, so I'll modify his words. But he said, you know, you're kind of an idiot. And I said, what do you mean? Like, I'm the smartest person you know. And he starts laughing, he goes, maybe. He said, but you know, if somebody came to you and said, if we give up half of Powell Prairie, that's the settlement that I'm from, because I'm the only actual settler in here, by the way. Yeah, I live on Powell Prairie Métis settlement. So he said that if they told you that if you gave up half of Powell Prairie settlement to the white man, and then the white man would give you peace, what would you tell them? And so, you know, I use the word that, like, you know, it starts with an F, and I you know, ends with their half. And he looks at me and he said, so why are you so comfortable telling Jewish people that they should give up half of their land that they have left for peace? He said, does that make any sense to you? And no joke, it was like a switch flip. I was like, yeah, I'm kind of being a dick. Like I was telling all my Jewish friends, like, yeah, you guys have to give up half your land. It's the only fair way. It's the fair and balanced solution, right? But when you look at it, it's not fair and balanced at all. So now I tell people, I believe in the 22-state solution, right? The Arabs have 22 states, and they can keep them. You guys have yours. You can keep yours. So it's one of those things where, as you come to these things, you learn by paying attention. So where was I going to go with that? Because sometimes I get off on a tangent. Oh yeah, so one of the things that most people do, that we don't even realize we're doing, is we concede too much ground, right? So because we're trying so hard to be nice to these people, that when they make an argument, rather than coming right out and telling them that's BS, or that's nonsense, we'll be like, oh, well, you know, that's their narrative, and you know, like, that's their story, and I really, you know, they believe it, so maybe I shouldn't be too forceful when I'm disabusing them of these notions. It's nonsense, right? Like when I see one of those videos with like the giant keys, I'm sure you've all seen them, where they stand there with the giant key, and they're like, this is the key to my grandfather's house, and you know, this key, it's all I have left. And I'm like, that's a big key. I'm looking at it, I'd like to see the lock of that key, right? Because it's nonsense, right? It's a prop. But we've been giving them, like, credibility. Why? We don't need to do that. And when they make statements like the indigenous Palestinians, I get really annoyed. And I get more annoyed when I see Jews letting them have that argument, because I'm like, they're not indigenous. In order to be indigenous, you have to actually have a cultural coalescence. You have to have like an ethnogenesis as a people. You have to become a people in a specific place. So remember when I said everything is site-specific? Jews can trace everything here, right here. Arabs trace everything to the Hijaz. Their language, what do they speak? They speak Arabic. Their way of interacting with the Creator. It's Islam. Where's Islam from? The Hijaz, right? All of their cultural constructs.
The what?
The Hijaz, the Arabian Peninsula. Sorry, I have a fancy word. So you can take me out of the school, but you can't get school with me. That's all good. So, yeah, so you end up with these people that are claiming to be indigenous to your place, but they're not. And you can very easily refute it. Now their new excuse is that, well, you know, my great-great-grandmother was Jewish. It's like, okay, so? Unless you're logically Jewish, that doesn't mean anything, and unless you're actually siding with the Jewish people, it means even less. Because once you adopt the conqueror's mantle, when you put on the cloak of the conqueror and you walk around telling everybody, I'm with the conqueror, you're not with the locals anymore. You're part of the problem. You're one of the people that are inferior. And one of the reasons that's important is because they constantly try to delegitimize you. And we don't fight fire with fire. We're way too nice on our side. And you do see some people, like Avi does it, you know, my friend Ari used to do it, Yishai does it. We do it very firmly and unapologetically, and that's how you have to do it. The problem is
We don't have enough people out there. I mean, we're outnumbered significantly. And that's another part of the problem. One of the big problems too, I think, is that, like, I don't know how to say this without sounding really, really mean, but like, you people are too freaking nice. Like, if somebody's saying really, really offensive stuff to me, like literally advocating for the death of people I care about, I'm going to use foul language. I'm not just going to be like, that's really unfortunate. I'm going to be like, that's F. You know, like, I'm literally going to tell people, no, I'm not okay with that. And I'm not just going to like write a stern email. Like, I'm not going to tell like outrage how angry I am. Like, I'm going to show them how angry I am, right? And like I try to explain to my Jewish friends, like that's why I joke about you guys being too nice. Like, you guys saw what happened when that Druze kid, what happened with the Druze kid a couple months ago. And it's funny because I hear lots of Jewish people talking about it too. They're like, yeah, the Druze really know how to deal with the Arabs. Yeah, learn from that. Like, pay attention. I mean, they literally kidnapped the kid from the hospital, leading to his death. And what did the Druze do? Did they write mean emails? Like, did they say, well, you were really upset about that, you guys? No. They said, okay, well, we're going to go and kidnap a few of you guys. If you don't bring back the body, we're going to send you guys some bodies. That's how you deal with people like that. And I know, look, that's not a popular thing. It's not a thing that a lot of people are excited to hear. But the truth is, sometimes you fight fire with fire. Now, the other thing that it's kind of really important for me to talk about, I want people to understand that you are not powerless. Okay? Everybody in this room has the ability to impact this fight in some way. Right? Now, I'm not one of those dudes that walks around telling everybody, oh yeah, you know, like fight with your wallet and write checks. That's good. Like, if you find a good project that you genuinely believe in, absolutely you should support it. But each one of you can also do things on your own. Literally, like what Gabriel's talking about. Starting a WhatsApp group, I know it's going to sound funny because people are like, well, I'm already at 50 WhatsApp groups because most of you guys are in like family WhatsApp groups, work WhatsApps. But the truth is, if you have a group where you can say, okay, look, here's action alert. Somebody posted something, and I'm not talking about your average anti-Semites. Let's be clear about that too, okay? Because if you try to fight every single anti-Semitic incident on Facebook, you'll lose because you don't have the time. What you do is you pay attention. Oh, this guy's got 5,000 followers and he works for the United Nations. That might be a guy that we should be paying attention to. He writes something extremely anti-Semitic, you get some friends, and you make something happen on his wall, right? Now, some of you might think, okay, well, how does that even work? A couple years ago, Hamas decided they were going to ask Hamas a question, right? Trying to legitimize a terrorist group on Twitter. So they told everybody, at 5 o'clock, we're going to open it up for questions. Anybody can ask a question, and Hamas will answer your questions, because they're not a terrorist group, they're just a nice bunch of people, right? So I called a whole bunch of my friends, and I said, okay, here's what we're going to do. Right at 5 o'clock, we're going to go on there, and I want you to ask the most ridiculous questions possible, right? And a lot of my friends at first didn't understand. They were like, why would we do that? And I was like, because I don't want people taking these idiots seriously. Right? So if you go and ask them, like, you know, why do you hate Jews so much? You know, like, there's so much peace. Why don't we just ask for peace? If we would have done that, then we'd come off looking like whiny losers, right? But instead, I went on there and I asked questions like, do you like pancakes? Right? The next question I asked, if a tree falls in the forest, do you still want to kill all the Jews? Right? So I just did it as ridiculous as possible. Then my one that got me in deep trouble, I said, due to the shortage of women in Gaza, do you want to bring in more sheep or more goats? I got to cancel for being racist. And then I said, oh, I'm sorry, I should have mentioned mamas. And then somebody said, really? And I said, yeah, I don't want to look homophobic. That's terrible joke. But seriously, I actually did that. But that's what I'm talking about. So sometimes, you know, you have to fight with a little bit of humor, but you can't. Look, you can't always be nice. Sometimes you gotta be funny. Sometimes you gotta be mean. The other thing too, like, I didn't really want to talk about this because it's like, I'm not good with like the feelingsy stuff, but like this stuff that happened just recently with the rabbi's family, right? Like, a family got machine gunned. And like I saw a lot of people say, may their blood be avenged. And they all say it kind of like, just like I just said, may their blood be avenged. It's like a reaction. It's not It's not serious. And that needs to be serious. Like the idea, I have friends here in Israel, and I'm getting choked up. The idea that people can be murdered, and we just think of it as a part of day-to-day life, is not okay, right? And we've become that. Like we've started, like look, one of the biggest problems they have with Israel is that people start ramming people with cars, so you put up concrete barriers by the bus stop, right? They launch rockets at playgrounds in Sderot, so they built a playground underneath a bomb shelter. That's not the way to deal with this stuff. Like, I always tell people, look, the best walls are made out of fear. They're made out of concrete. So what you need to do is you need to find what they fear. Because if they tell you they don't fear death, okay, find something they fear more than death. And then you do it. And that's part of the problem. That's a large part of the problem. You guys, like, it's funny, one of the reasons I actually left Christianity, I realized I wasn't meant to be a Christian because I got tired of people telling me to turn the other cheek all the time, right? I know it's hard to believe because I'm not small now, but growing up, I was a runt, right? I was really, really, really small. And if anybody calls me this in public, I'll ignore you, but my nickname was Tiny Ryan. And I freaking hated it, right? And as I got bigger, I changed obviously, but I stopped being, so easy to pick on. It was one of the big things. I want people to understand that you guys are not small. You're not. I mean, sometimes you look kind of small and you're pretty short to me, but lots of you people are giants. You are, like, look at the stuff you've done, the stuff your people have accomplished, the stuff you've accomplished. Since the first time I came to the Gush, I didn't even recognize it. Like, when I came back, after 5 years of not coming to Israel, I didn't recognize the place. Like, there's so much building going on. There's so many things getting changed here. It's amazing. Like, you can make these changes. And I think that you have to make these changes. Because as like the other guys told you, government, I'd like to believe that the government has its heart in the right place. I'd like to believe that they're eventually going to do the right stuff and start fighting this nonsense. But I haven't seen anything that would lead me to believe that. Right? Like, I still see people being killed. I remember in 2014, right on my first trip, I think it was 2014, the 3 boys that were killed. Like, why is it that we have all of these stories? And everybody knows, as soon as I say the 3 boys, everybody knew, right? Like, everybody knows our full. Everybody knows this stuff. But why is it that every time I come here, there's another horrible story like this? It's because we're not forcing the government, holding them to account. And, it was nice to see the big protest. I went to the protest. And it's nice to hear everybody say our vote matters, right? But what you should be saying is our voice matters. What you should be saying is, we're not going to accept this stuff anymore. Like, that stuff that happened in Huara, I don't know how to say it, I'm not an Arab, but that village, right? I noticed there were a lot of people condemning the Jewish people that did that. Look, I'm not a vigilante. I could be sometimes, but I didn't think that what they did was maybe the right way to react, but I understood. When you get that mad, sometimes you got to do something. And maybe it's not the right thing to do. Maybe it makes you, as a group, not look that good. But I understand that kind of anger. And I wish that maybe we could channel that kind of anger and do something productive with it. Because we have to. Like, I'm looking at what's going on here. And it's mind-boggling to me. Because I saw, when I was at that protest, of course the media is telling us that it's like 100,000 people, right? There were more than 100,000 people there. Because I got off the train, we couldn't even walk up to the Knesset. Like, it took us an hour and a half to walk from the main road to the Knesset from the train. That's like a 2-minute walk tops. Like, there's so many people there. And it was Jews from all walks of life. I saw people there with covered hair. I saw women there with no covered hair and like crazy makeup and unicorn crap. And like, it was, I saw people from every walk of life. I saw Iraqi people. I saw Ashkenazi people. I saw everybody, every segment of Israeli society there. Well, except maybe the Talibanis. But, I saw every kind of Israeli. Why did I see that? Because they felt strongly enough about the judicial reform that they decided, I'm going to take the time to go down here and make sure they know that at least they're going to hear us, that our vote matters. Well, tell them your voice matters. Stuff like this shouldn't be happening. And all of you guys have a platform. If you're on social media, if your kids are on social media, you can talk about it. Talk about it at shul. Start these WhatsApp groups. If you see somebody saying something ridiculous, come back. So I'm going to kind of cut it off short there, but I will say this. If any of you ever need a hand with that, there are people like Avi, Yishai, Malka, Namaru. There's a ton of people here who are social media, I guess we call them social media natives. They know how to use social media. It's not like you guys need some foreigner to come over here and tell you how to do it. You know how to do it. It's just you have to get motivated to do it. And I don't know any other way to say it other than that. Because we're at a point now where I see this stuff, and as somebody that's not even Jewish, I don't know how you guys handle it. And I don't want to end on a downer note, because that is pretty, it's pretty heavy, right? So I want you guys to know, you have the ability to make these changes. You can do it. I have faith in you. Look, I joke all the time because I say sometimes I think I have more faith in Jewish people than one of my friends that are Jewish. Because I believe that all this stuff about judicial reform, I believe that Jewish people vote. That's your check and balance. I mean, Europe did something stupid, right, with that Hezbollah oil gas platform, and what happened? This coalition fell apart. It forces an election, and then people voted as that sound. They're like, beat it, we don't want you. So if somebody does something stupid, what's going to happen? I think that the coalition will fall apart and vote. Then you have an election and you vote. Look, I don't think there's any way you guys will ever become fascists. It's ridiculous. It's a nonsense argument. So, but I do think you guys need to become a little more angry. And you need to be able to say, that's not acceptable, we need to change it. And I'm really hoping that maybe, even in some small way, listening to me talking, maybe it'll help you understand that you're not alone. There are people out there that believe this, and we're not Jewish. There are a lot of us that genuinely believe you can make these changes. And that you should. So, anyway, that's all I got.
Any questions?
I'll open up for questions if anybody has any. And look, I'll answer like personal questions, but if they're goofy, I'll give you a goofy answer.
Thank you very much for coming to us today and visiting us from afar. Really, your talk had two different battles that you were focusing on, two different ones. One is the social media, the narrative against Israel, the apartheid, colonialist occupation, settler narrative. And then you had another topic, separate, which is weakness, Jewish response, government weakness. A lot of times when we come up with the right narrative in social media, we're undermined by a governmental weak response. And no matter how much social media you have out there, calling ourselves indigenous, Judeans, etc., when our government does not take a place like Hebron seriously and undermines it, so we are, in a sense, we come out of a social media battle against two fronts, where our own government is not really that supportive of it. So how to address that kind of situation?
So that's actually the toughest things you're going to find. So, especially when it comes to the Arabs, right? So remember I said, when you're an indigenous person and you're arguing from an indigenous perspective, you have to argue from an indigenous perspective. The government, unfortunately, does that a lot. They talk about how, this is their ancestral land, but then they don't show it. So the Arabs, they see how you act with the Temple Mount, right? Now, I don't have to explain to you guys that the Temple Mount is the most sacred place in the world for Jews. I mean, that's not an argument. Nobody who knows anything about Jews would ever try to argue that with me. But now when you look at how the government treats the Temple Mount, you would think that if you're an outsider, you're looking at it from an outside perspective, and you're thinking, well, either they're not really Jewish, or that site's not that important to Jews. So those are your two arguments, which is why you hear Arabs literally saying, Jews in Israel aren't real Jews. You're not the real Jews. They will make that argument with a straight face. Because if you were really Jews, you would care more about the Machpelah and Hebron. You would care more about the Temple Mount. That's one of their arguments. And the sad thing is, your government, they've never really figured out this whole social media thing, right? I mean, do you remember a couple years ago with the Mohammed al-Dura stuff, right? So basically, the Palestinians got free publicity, and it was one of the most horrific things. I mean, some African places put it on their Kurds. like this picture of a guy and his son that was supposedly killed by the IDF. And it wasn't until a French citizen spent his own money to debunk that whole nonsense that the Israeli government was shamed into saying, yeah, okay, we made a mistake there, we should have fought it from the beginning. Because instead, what did they do? They were like, oh, you know, it's a terrible thing, you know, we'll look into it, but yeah, we apologize. They apologized before it was even determined that they were at fault. So you're right, like, look, I'm not going to give you guys any, I'm not going to shine a flashlight. Okay, I'm going to rephrase that. I'm not going to blow smoke. I'm not going to tell you that things are easier or shinier than they are. The truth is, yeah, you're going to be fighting a lot against your own government. You're going to be fighting against, a lot of times, against American Jews, because some of the worst people that I deal with on social media are American Jews who hate Israel for some reason. And yeah, it's not, sometimes you're going to be fighting against Israelis even. I mean, we've seen that with what's going on right now. But you're right, it's not just a two-front fight either. Sometimes it might be a 5 or 6 front fight. But there's only one thing worse than fighting a 4 or 5 front fight, and that's not fighting. So we have to make a choice, right? It's not, look, I don't know if you guys know this, but it's not really fun sometimes being up at 3 a.m. arguing with anti-Semites all the time. I mean, I laugh about it because you gotta laugh or you're gonna cry. But the truth is, sometimes it's not easy, sometimes it's tough. And that's why it's also good to have people that you are simpatico with. I'll tell you what, my battery was so recharged from going to that protest, because sometimes I get fed up with it. You know, I get tired of it. It's not easy. And like I try to look, I want to be the guy that when people say, hey, that's Ryan, he never ever gets tired of this. You know, he's tough, he doesn't care. Sometimes I do get tired. Sometimes I'm just like, I don't want to do this shit today. I need stuff today. And, you know, but the truth is that I'm around people like this. And you know, I come to Israel, I'm around my friends here in Israel, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's why I do it all the time. Right? And you guys even more so. So it's important. Yeah.
You talked about 2 different fronts, where one of the other people here said that. What about the whole question of how we Jews need to be united in order to be strong?
So,
that's a very serious issue right now.
100%. Look, it's kind of like when the first person that was introducing us, he talked about it. He said, look, the creation of the state, there were all these different groups, and none of them got along, right? Like I think we've established that, you know, the left didn't really like the right, and the center didn't like anybody, and they had serious issues getting along. But when it came to actually creating the nation state for the Jewish people, they put that aside, at least until they got the state created. Your problem right now is you have some people who literally, it seems like they don't really care about unity, right? It seems like they would put personal feelings ahead of what's good for the country. I got nothing. I don't know what to tell you, other than to tell you sometimes you gotta just do what's right, and it doesn't matter if the other guy does it or not. Maybe, hopefully, some of them on the other side will smarten up. I'm not gonna, like I said, I'm not here to tell you lies. I mean, I'm not Palestinian. So, like, I really wish I had something more, I wish I had something that I could tell you that was going to change that. But it's a really tough situation. Sorry, this guy has got first.
You know, many years ago, before social media and the internet, when I was much younger, I was involved in many fights, and we used to win. Right. Now we have social media, and sometimes I see a story. Let's talk Times of Israel.
Yeah.
You know, I'll give you one of I can give you 100 examples. And the reaction to the story is generally limited. But my concern is if I chime in, I can draw the other side, make comments, and there's no one on my side. So I'll be fighting against, all of a sudden, I'll be going 1 against 50. And instead of really fighting for the cause, I feel alone and I'm going to lose.
Yeah.
And I need people on my team.
That's exactly what part is talking about. So listen, there is a thing on social media, and it's funny because they talk about the psychology of social media. So there's a dopamine hit when you post something and people actually like it or they share it. And there's actually also a negative dopamine hit when you get ratioed. By ratioed, I mean a whole bunch of people pile on you and give you negative feedback, right? So that's why if you have a WhatsApp group, and I've seen it work, I've seen it in action. you have 13 or 14 people even, and you just go and post, you don't feel alone anymore, even if there's just 2 or 3 of you, right? So sometimes, look, I'm a little bit contrary, okay? So I like to interpret movements. So I go on the anti-Semite sites, like I'll go on Stormfront, you know, the Israel-Palestine Peace Coalition, like, you know, and I'll go on there and I'll argue with those people. But I know that not everybody's built like me, so it's better to have more people. And look, even me, I love it when I post on something and all of a sudden somebody else is like, yeah, that's right. And then someone else will post, yeah, this is, you know, and then you get a bunch of people and it changes. It will change. Look, we're not, they outnumber us significantly. But I believe strongly in the 80-10-10 rule, right? So it's 10% hate you, you're not going to change their mind. 10% love you, you don't have to change their mind. And 80% don't give a crap. But out of that 80%, you might still reach maybe 5%, maybe 10%. And if they see you arguing, they'll have the opportunity to at least learn something, right? Look, we actually have the facts on our side. This is why it's so frustrating for me. We have a nation of Nobel Prize winners, right? We have the facts. We should be winning this going away. It shouldn't even be a question. But the problem is the orgs that get most of the money, that raise money and get donations, they do very little, right? And the people, the grassroots people that are doing the fighting, they usually don't have a lot of resources to do the fighting with. So it's a problem. And then the government, for whatever reason, half the time they get involved, or half the time they get a Messianic Christian to do advocacy work for the nation of Israel. So, you know, it's kind of one of those things where you just shake your head. It's like, we have all of these advantages and yet we're losing. Why are we losing? There's no way we should be losing this. And I think it will change.
First of all, it's unbelievable hearing you say we. And again, so thankful to you, Ryan, that you're part of us, even though you don't have skin in the game. So the second question is connected to that. My first question is, you mentioned earlier the importance of us, the Jewish people, having full sovereignty over the Temple Mount, not for religious reasons. So if you could expand upon that. And then the second question is, why are you in this fight with us?
Okay, so first off, you were wrong about the not having skin. A lot of people, that's something people say to me all the time. Why do you bother with this? You don't have skin in the game. I do have skin in the game. Did you? My friend Nam, right? I held her kids when they were babies. You don't think that's skin? So, yeah, of course I have skin in the game. Okay, so I'm going to shift because I don't want to be all crybaby. Yeah, I have skin in the game, but more importantly, like when we're talking about the Temple Mount, why did I even bring it up? If you don't show people that something's important to you, they will take it away, right? So if I'm a foreign person, if I've got no skin in the game, if I'm just some foreigner sitting at home on the couch watching TV, and I see a place that is literally supposed to be the most sacred place in the world, and you send the message that it's not that important, what message do I take away? And that's why it's important. Not just from a religious perspective. You have to understand how other people are watching this fight. So, one of the biggest problems we have is that Jewish people aren't. So you have this amazing story, and you tell it like a 5-year-old. That's the problem, right? That's the most sacred place in the entire world, and yet someone else controls it. Even though you have sovereignty over your ancestral land, someone else controls the most sacred place in the world for your people. That's a problem. It's not just a problem for religious either. It's a problem for anybody who believes in Jewish sovereignty. Because until you have sovereignty over your entirety of your ancestral land, you don't have sovereignty. They control it. When I went up to the Temple Mount the first time, I had Arabs telling me a bunch of stuff, and it was actually kind of funny, but it's also really enraging. It's the reason that I don't go up there very often when I'm here. They told me I couldn't rip my clothes. I didn't know what that meant. Right? Because I'm not Jewish. I didn't know that you guys rip your clothes as a sign of mourning. But they told me I couldn't rip my clothes, and I was like, why would I rip my clothes? Then they told me I couldn't bow my head. And I was like, in my culture, that's a sign of respect. So like when you're in deep thought, you bow your head, right? They told me I couldn't do that. And I was really offended by that. There's a lot of things, like there's things that Jews are not allowed to do. You're only allowed to go up there certain times of the day. And yet, if I go on social media like TikTok, I see all this nonsense about how Muslims aren't allowed to go up on the Temple Mount. So I went up there recently and I took some videos and I took a picture of me flipping the bird at the mosque. And I did that for a reason. I was mad. I don't go up there because my friends can't go there. That pisses me off. It's not fair. It's not right. And then I see all these green doors, and I'm not sure if even some of you guys know what those mean. There's a ton of green doors all around the old city. The only people that are allowed to go through those doors are Muslims. And if you're not Muslim and you try to go through one of those doors, you get arrested. Tell me that's not apartheid. Right? They want to talk about apartheid. Let's talk about apartheid. Let's talk about why are there two different rules for Jews and then a different rule for Arabs. Yeah, except the different rule for Arabs actually benefits them. Like, you're not allowed to go to your own sacred place on your own high holidays. You're not allowed to go up there. Why? It's ridiculous. If you go to the Makbullah, you're only allowed to go in there at certain days. And if you want to go into the most sacred part of that place, so I don't even know if you're allowed.
10 days a year.
Yeah, 10 days a year. How ridiculous is that? That's your sacred place. That's not even their sacred place. They don't even pretend. They just say that it's a mosque. And it's like the burial place of your ancestors. That's offensive. And that's why, you want to talk about skin in the game. Here's my skin in the game. That stuff pisses me off, and I don't like it. And I'll do whatever I can to change it. So, sorry, I don't want to see that. Sorry. I got angry.
I wish we had the attitude of Menachem Begin 41 years ago with Joe Biden.
Yeah.
Said in foreign relations committee, if you allow me, I'd like to just repeat what he said.
Sure.
He answered they were trying to withhold funds from Israel, financial aid, and Menachem Begin responded as follows: "Don't threaten us with cutting off your aid. It will not work. I'm not a Jew with trembling knees. I'm a proud Jew with 37,000 years of civilized history. Nobody came to our aid when we were dying in the gas chambers and ovens. Nobody came to our aid when we were striving to create our country. We paid for it, we fought for it, we died for it. We will stand by our principles, we will defend them, and when necessary, we will die for them again, with or without your aid."
Absolutely.
And that's the attitude we should all be taking.
100%.
I just wanted to mention one of the, to me, very enheartening things that I've seen, which is that, you've got this huge Muslim culture of hatred towards the Jews, and there's so many people in it, not all of them can continue to be so ridiculously full of hatred. And there's a few of these exceptional people who figured out that they're on the really, really wrong side of history. Bakr Hussein, Hussein Abu Bakr, and a few of these people, and having these people to expose what's really going on in the Muslim world is such a fantastic thing. I wonder if you're in touch with these people and how they can help us.
So yeah, if you want to contact any of them, I know Yahya personally, I know Hussein personally. They're good people. Look, I don't want to ever come across that I don't like Arabs. My best friend growing up is an Lebanese Christian. When my mom passed away, his mom was not a prophet. That's how I learned how to swear at Arabic. So, trust me, it works. It made me really angry. So, yeah, you can always find good people, and that's another important thing, I think, is that sometimes we do get overwhelmed because we see all of the hatred. So, when I was in Hebron, I didn't see a whole lot of people that were pro-Israel, right? What I did see were people like Issa Amro and those scumbags. I see them and they say ridiculously horrific stuff. But I'm not really trying to reach those people. And yeah, you can find good people anywhere in any group. And I think that those people that we mentioned, especially, and there's Yosef Haddad, there's lots of Israeli Druze, there's Israeli Arabs that serve the IDF. I think we need to remember that, but at the same time, we also need to remember they're a minority voice, and it's important to give them a voice, especially in our struggle. But it's also important to realize that a lot of these people do not have your best interests at heart. And you need to understand that, because they're not going to be your friend. It doesn't matter how many times you hug a terrorist, he's still a terrorist. Now, but the good people, we can't afford to alienate them, and we really do need to make sure that we give them a voice. But absolutely.
Thank you so much for coming. It's so great to have you. I was wondering if you could actually speak for a second about, more from the perspective of a fellow Indigenous person, how in your community our situation, our plight, our story is viewed, and whether you think that whether you think our outcome will affect outcomes for other Indigenous people.
Absolutely, that's actually a great question. So there's really two kinds of groups in the Native rights community, right? So there's the activists. A lot of them are very lefty. They've been kind of infected with that whole victimhood paradigm. They really don't like it, right? And the truth is, Jews are terrible victims. Like, you're really bad victims. Because a victim is supposed to stay a victim. The victim's not supposed to accomplish anything. A victim is supposed to wallow in victimhood and complain about everything bad. I really got it. Sorry, guys. It's where I'm from, right? I'm from the bush. So it's like you're always supposed to be a victim. You're not supposed to be anything else, right? So those people really don't like you because you make everything they believe a lie. Because if anybody should have the right to be a victim, it would be people that underwent an industrial scale genocide, right? If anybody has a right to say, yeah, you know what, our life was really crappy, and you know we're just gonna stay here wallowing in our crapitude. Well, yeah, you have the right to do that out of anybody, but you didn't, right? 1948, these are people that just got out of the Holocaust and basically were handed rifles and said, "Here's your homeland, fight for it," and you did, and you won. So now there's all these other groups that are fighting, and you know some of them not so successful. They didn't go through all the same things you went through with immediacy, right? Like the North American genocide happened mainly in the 1800s, right? But we're still recovering from it. We're still dealing with the echoes of that genocide. So for some of those people, they don't like the idea that there's, you know, a group of people that accomplished what you did, because to them it's like, you know, how did they do that? They must have cheated, right? And then they assume the worst. Now, the good thing is that there's other people, and it's mostly elders and intelligent people who pay attention. And they look at you and say, there's a group of indigenous people who they reclaimed their ancestral land. They started using their ancestral language again. Like, they see you as an example of what is possible. And that is the most important thing, is that now we have an example, right? We have somebody we can look at and say, they did what we're trying to do. Now, does that mean that we're going to suddenly take over Canada? No. But what it does mean is that maybe we're going to try harder to get participatory power in Canada, right? Because we see you achieve national self-determination. So that there's no excuse for us not to push harder to have actual participation in our governments. Like we're not, and most of us aren't going to advocate for kicking white people out of Canada. We think that's ridiculous, like obviously. But we do think that we should be allowed to speak. We should be allowed to have government power, and we don't have that. So I think that there are a significant amount of people, and I think it's growing. I think there's more and more people, because most people, when you show how ridiculous a lie is, there are the people that just can't hear it. Put their fingers in their ears and blah, 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 right? But then there's the people that pay attention and say, hey, you know what, that makes sense. And I see it all the time. Like when I'm talking at groups in North America, they'll ask me, because that's the first question I get. Why do you give a shit about, why do you care about the Jews, right? And I always tell them, I'm like, why wouldn't I? Why don't you? And they look at me kind of funny, and I'll tell them, listen, they're indigenous. They're an indigenous people. And like, if I'm not willing to put myself out there for them, why would I expect them to do it for me? And like, if I'm not willing to listen and pay attention and apply consistent standards, and that's the key. Because some people don't want to listen, some people will.
Right. So, my question is this. I think that in this room, of the people who are doing this professionally and doing this a lot, I believe at the end of the day, there's a place where, I'm not one of those people who do it professionally, I've been out there and gotten counted in rooms, but I think at the end of the day, there's a place where we just say that God is doing this for us, and if it wasn't for God, there's no way any of this. Look at any little thing, it's too much. that, so my question to you really is, what's your reaction to that and how does that affect you personally? Either that we have that, or how does this, like, what's your...
Absolutely. You don't think the creator likes me? The creator loves me. He thinks I'm great. He looks after me. Otherwise, I'd have been dead a long time ago. I mean, like, I look at all the stuff that I've gone through, there's no possible way that I could do anything unless the creator really liked me. And I hate to break it to you, but you guys too. If he really likes you. If he didn't like you, he wouldn't be here. And this place, like, I talk about it all the time. It's funny because you guys joke about it being the land of miracles and like miracles are commonplace. You've forgotten if that's actually true. Like it's incredible. The stuff that I see here is amazing. And yet, okay, so one of the things I see here is that right now you guys are having these little fights between, you know, the religious and non-religious, the left and the right and everybody else. You're arguing about the drapes, the color of the drapes while your house is on fire. Like, you got to quit arguing about stuff that doesn't matter. What matters is that you're surrounded by a bunch of people who really don't like you, you're in a terrible neighborhood, your neighbors are jerks, and you've got to figure stuff out. And some of you are going to figure it out, some of you aren't. It is what it is. I mean, I've given up trying to convince people that can't be convinced, so now I figure, you know what, the best thing we can do. Like everybody says, oh, you're preaching to the choir. And I'm like, we don't even have people singing the same song. How's that a choir? So, you know, once we can get people to agree about stuff. When I first started talking about Israel, when I said, you know, like I have friends in the Gush, and I have friends that are, you know, over the Green Line. You'd have been amazed how many people were like, why would you do that? Are you an extremist? And I'm like, I'm literally the definition of centrist. Like, everybody thinks centrist means you sit on the fence, and you're in the middle. No. A centrist is somebody that sometimes he looks at the facts and he says, okay, on this thing, I'm right. And then he looks at the facts over here, and on this thing, I'll be on the left. But you can't ever pigeonhole me because you never know which side I'm going to take unless you have the same moral compass. And I think that, look, one of the things that we have to change is this idea that only the people that are exactly like us can be right. Because, I mean, the people over there, for whatever reason, they just don't see you the way I see you. I was lucky. Look, if I had met the wrong people at the very start of this, I'd be an anti-Semite. Right? There's no, like I wouldn't. I'd probably still hold the same beliefs that I hold because I'd like to believe that I'm a moral, ethical person. But if I met the wrong people at the wrong time, like, you know, people that are real jerks, I wouldn't have gotten involved. Because a lot of this is relationship-based advocacy. I do it because I care. Right? And I think most of you do it because you care. So.
Can I just add something on David's point? Which I think, I'm so glad that David raised this point because I think it's a very widespread opinion in our communities. You know, we prefer to think that everything's good and that God loves us and God will work it out and we don't have to do anything really. Yeah. And there are some sources like that in the Torah, but I think, I just want to say my opinion. My opinion is that the idea of emunah and that God helps us, that's not meant, I don't think, to stop us from doing things. I think it's meant to empower us to do things, to have the confidence that if we do what we can do, there's reason to believe we could succeed. We have the saying that we say at the end of Shabbat, Ma'aseh Yadenu Konanehu. It means, I forgot the whole pasuk, I'm sorry about that, but it means that God will bless the work of our hands.
Of course,
but it has to be in our hands.
There's a joke about that, right? Isn't there, where there's a rabbi and he's in the flood, and he's on the roof of the house, and some people come by in a boat, and they're like, Rabbi, jump in the boat, let's go. And he's like, no, God's going to look after me. And then a little while later, you know, the water's coming up a little bit higher, another boat comes by, and they're like, Rabbi, jump in the boat. He's like, no, God's looking after me. And then, you know, the helicopter comes because now the water is right up at the top. And the rabbi says, no, God's going to look after me. And then he drowns, and he gets to heaven, and he says to God, I thought you were going to look after him. He's like, dude, I sent 2 boats and a helicopter. What else do you want? That's really what we're talking about here. Like, I truly believe that you guys are the people that are blessed by God. I do. And I truly believe that he wants you to be here. If he didn't want you to be here, you wouldn't be here. I mean, you look at the facts. 5 Arab nations at the same time. People that literally just came out of an industrial scale genocide. There's not a single person that analyzes history that would have said, oh yeah, they're totally going to win. Like, no. There's a reason you're here. And it's not just because of God. I truly believe it's also because you fought. Because it's your ancestral land. And I believe that helps people fight. So yeah, no, God, of course, he's going to help you. I'm pretty sure he doesn't expect to do all the work.
So you've explained how you show solidarity with our problems. But I'm just wondering, how did your, can I call it a tribe? Is it a tribe?
Yeah.
Okay. How did your tribe react when your government carved out most of the Northwest Territory for the Inuit? I mean, they gave it to them, if you don't have a piece of Alberta.
Yeah, no, hey, I'll be blunt. There are some people in my own community that think I should focus more strictly on our stuff. But the problem is too, like, and I joke about it all the time, working with Indians is just as hard as working with Jews. It's like herding cats, but the cats have ADD. So it's not fun. And yeah, you know, like there's a lot of stuff going on. Like, I don't know if you guys know this, but where I'm from is a Métis settlement. Okay? The government exiled us from the Red River, which is in Manitoba. That's the center of Canada. We were exiled, so we went west. And then we were forced again to go north. Now, we're not on our ancestral land, but in the 1990s, my dad and a bunch of other guys wrote the Métis Proclamation, and basically the government ceded a bunch of land in northern Alberta to us. Now, it's mostly swamp, but, you know, it is what it is. We make the best of it, right? It might sound a little bit familiar. They didn't give us everything we asked for. They kind of gave us, you know, some pretty crappy land, but we figured, okay, we'll make it work, right? The problem that we have in Canada is that a lot of people don't understand, like, even between Native nations, there's a lot of friction, right? We don't always get along. So we're not a monolithic people either. So you end up, a lot of us are fighting for the same thing, but sometimes we're at cross purposes. So it's tough. Like, that's a topic for a whole talk. I could talk for 4 hours about that. I'm fighting with my own government right now. I'm taking them to court because we applied for land and we followed all the rules, and they've been fighting us every step of the way. So we have to take them to court. So yeah, it's tough. It's not, and a lot of people like what I do. There's a lot of people that are constantly asking me questions, and they love to follow. Like, if you look, I started a TikTok, and in less than a week, I had 1,500 followers, because it's all Native people that wanted to see me talk about Indigenous stuff, and they want to see my videos from Israel. And yeah, I get a ton of good comments. Like, look, I get a lot of crap from the Arabs because they didn't know who I was. So they randomly see, I'm going to Israel. And they're like, oh, let's pile on this guy. And I'm like, I am not the guy. Right? So they'll try to do what, you can't go there, it's apartheid. And I'll be like, Canada's apartheid, Israel's totally cool. Right? And Canada is apartheid, so everybody knows. Canada has 2 laws for 2 people in 1 nation. So if you're an Indian, you're governed under the Indian Act. If you're white, you're not governed under the Indian Act. That's the definition of apartheid. In Israel, Israeli Arabs have all the same rights as we have. So it's not part of it.
You mentioned earlier that you have to figure out what it is that enemies fear.
Yes.
So in your opinion, what is it that they fear, and what do we do about that? What do we actively do about it? And another question, if you had a chance to sit like eyeball to eyeball with Netanyahu,
yeah.
Having heard everything, what would you say to him that could make a difference? What would you highlight to him? How would you motivate him, and what would you motivate him with?
Yeah. So the first thing, I'll answer the first question first. Okay. What do they fear more than anything? They're an honor culture. They're an honor culture. They hate being humiliated. They hate being told that they're not strong. If you look at them, even when they're talking about losing, they still talk about how tough they are, how they're so powerful, right? It actually directly impacts how they do advocacy, and it's one reason I don't understand how they lose to these people, because they want everyone to see them as these super strong, powerful martyr people, but at the same time they want to be victims. They can't reconcile the two. So how would I deal with that, in all honesty? They conduct a terror attack and they harm people, you give their property to those people. It accomplishes 2 things, right? As Muslims, they cannot have non-Muslims in a position of authority over them. Right? In Islam, that's an actual thing, and any religious Muslim who's being honest will tell you that. So, what happens? Oh, you conducted a terror attack, well now your family's ancestral home that you've been in for 40 years, you know, ancestral for 40 years, that's a contradiction of terms,
But either way, you give that house to the victim's family. And you collect rent, because now you're in a position of authority over them. They hate that. You do that 5 or 6 times, I guarantee suddenly a lot of these people that are thinking, hey, it's a good day to kill a Jew, probably not going to think that. They're probably going to think, oh, if I do that, my family doesn't just lose their home, but now we're under the dominion of the Jews. We have no way around it, right? That's one of the things that I think you could do that would genuinely change the paradigm. It would change the way that they act, it would change what they do. The other thing is you guys got to take back control of the schools. That's like the most important thing. You allowing UNRWA to run these indoctrination hate centers is probably the one thing that's single most contributed to this, other than obviously foreign money. Right? Because what do? They teach kids hate from a young age. The Americans, when they instituted the Marshall Plan, what did they do? First thing they did was take over the education system in Japan. Right? They taught what needed to be taught. And then they put a ton of money into infrastructure and jobs, and within 15 years, they had another ally. Right? Now, I'm not saying it's going to be as easy to do, but it'll be a lot better than what we have now. And if I could talk to that guy, I would probably tell him that. And I would tell him, look, dude, look, smarten up. 20 years ago, I thought you were the man. I think you're an idiot. Like, you went from being a person that I had the utmost respect for. But after 30 years, what do we really have to show for so-called right-wing government? Like, all the stuff that I believe in, like, how long did it take for you guys to be able to build a shopping center? Right? That's ridiculous. This is Jewish ancestral land. This is the Jewish ancestral heartland. Shouldn't have taken that long. Like, why is it that it's a war crime for a Jew to build a balcony for an extra bathroom? And then they make it sound like you guys are doing this horrible stuff. You're stealing land. No. And I would tell them, just be who you are. If you ever hear some of his speeches, I mean, the guy's a brilliant speaker, and he is intelligent, and understands the history. I mean, I've seen videos from him when he was at MIT, you know, arguing with anti-Semites, and the guy was brilliant. And, you know, he's a decorated soldier. He's defended your people with his own blood.
What's holding him back?
That's, you know, I gotta be really careful when I say I don't want to be banned for coming here. So, I genuinely believe that, you know, it is heart of hearts. He's with you, but the problem is, he just can't come that extra step, right? A lot of these people from the center, they don't understand. They've been around that milieu too long. And they need to, that's why I said on Facebook the other day, if every single person in Israel came up to the Gush and walked around up here, if we had better videos, like, I did a tour of the Gush on an ATV with my friend the other day. And, you know, we were literally driving down the way of the patriarchs. Okay? That's huge. We saw a mikvah that's 3,000 years old. Not a Palestinian mikvah, a mikvah. So when the Palestinians are saying, well, we were here before you, it's like, cool, where's your stuff? Right? Maybe we should show these videos. We should say, look, this is proof that there's Jewish presence here. Yeah. So, you know, if maybe, you know, people from other parts of Israel came here and spent the Shabbat with you, got to know your families. That's relation-based advocacy, right? They get to see, oh, wait a minute, these evil settlers that are the cause of all the problems are just really good people. And they live out here because they believe that they should be here, right? It's always been really strange to me because people always tell Jews, you can only live where it's okay. Like, you can only live where we say it's okay, right? But now I see Jews living in Tel Aviv saying that the Jews here. And I feel like telling them, you know that if you actually followed this logic to its conclusion, you wouldn't be in Israel. Because there were people that said, everywhere here is not okay for you to be here. And now you're telling Jews that live in the actual ancestral heartland that they shouldn't be there, because it's a problem. It just seems really weird. Like, I know I'm not Jewish, but come on. It doesn't take a Jewish person to figure that out.
This is not exactly on public, it's an indigenous question.
Sure.
And I'm going to give you two choices just to not take people's time.
Sure.
The name Washington Redskins.
Love it.
You are happy or you are...
Absolutely.
You love
Redskins
it.
fan. Redskins fan since I was 7 years old.
So when they changed the name, you were happy or angry?
I was pissed off.
There you go.
I sent them a really nasty letter. And if I would have been in Washington, I probably would have done more.
And your friends?
Everybody in Powell Prairie that wears Washington Redskins gear was not impressed. Most Native people that I know that actually watch football, not impressed. People that don't watch football and don't play football, they didn't care.
Okay.
Why is that? Well, here's the thing, like they erase us from, they're literally erasing us from pop culture, right? So when we were growing up, there weren't a lot of Indian role models, and there's not a lot of Native people on TV. Like, it's kind of like Jews, right? You watch movies, and like the Jewish guy is always the nevishy sidekick, right? He's never the badass main character. Same thing with Indians. The Indian is always like either the wise old Indian in the trailer park, or he's like, you know, or he's the guy that like everybody laughs at. It's never the hero. But when you watch the Redskins, and they have that badass emblem, it makes you feel kind of a little bit proud. And then when we beat up the Cowboys, we go, yes. People laugh when I say it, but I'm not joking, man. We used to beat the Cowboys, I had like a heart attack with bells. We don't like, nobody likes to be raised.
Connecting Jewish people to indigenous aspect, not on a religious level, but what's the importance of traditions?
Well, that's everything, right? Like, so we talk constantly about identity, right? And how important an authentic identity is. So, like this weekend, I spent time at a friend's house for Shabbat, right? The thing that makes Shabbat so impressive to me is it's a group of people doing something the same way they've done it for thousands of years. And then I went to shul, and I saw people dancing, and not just enjoying their traditions, but embracing them, right? And part of the problem we have in the modern world is that people don't do that anymore. People have stopped caring about tradition, have stopped caring about things that I think are vital for your identity, and a large part of it is, like I said, comfort is the enemy of identity. So, if you're comfortable, you don't care about that stuff. But if you're a little bit uncomfortable, you know, you will make more of an effort. It's kind of like, if you look at like FSU Jews, they're a good example. They had everything taken away from them because the Russians wouldn't let them do anything Jewish. They wouldn't let them manifest any sort of Jewishness in their identity. So they replaced it with Zionism, which is not bad. At least they're Zionists, right? But what it's doing is I see it a lot in that community now. A lot of them, they start off with the Zionism, and they slowly start realizing, wait a second, like, I have a good friend of mine actually from California, Misha knows her. She starts off with, her kids are really Zionists, she starts helping out, starting a Zionist youth organization, then she comes to Israel, and she starts seeing things, and then something kind of just moves a little bit inside. And then, you know, she starts thinking, hey, you know what, maybe there's something to this stuff. And the next thing you know, her son's having a bar mitzvah and makbala, right? That's the kind of stuff that you can't quantify that kind of stuff. It's amazing. And you need that. You need people to understand the importance of identity. And traditions, that's where your traditions are. So you don't necessarily have to be religious to understand the significance of a sacred place.
Can you go into the challenge you have with your own tribe?
Yeah, so we don't have a Torah. It's pretty simple. We don't even have a written language, right? So, especially in my community's case, what ends up happening is the government is not stupid. They wanted to get rid of Indians, so what did they do? They took away all of our elders, right? They took the children away from the elders. So the children go to these residential schools, and they teach us how to be white. And they were pretty clear about it. They said, take the Indian out of the child to save the child. So then one whole generation is removed from their elders. So now there's two things that happen there. One, they lose their language. Two, they lose their connection to their people, right? Now these kids come home, now they don't speak their language, so the elders are trying to teach them traditional ways, but a lot of these kids are like, you know, this is stupid, I don't want to do this traditional nonsense. I mean, I learned how to live in the modern world now. What do I need with this traditional crap? And so now there's a divide between these two generations, and now all of a sudden you have one whole generation that never learned the traditions. So what happens is now my generation doesn't have an elder to go to learn, because there's so few actual traditional people. And then we have something very, look, it'll offend some people here, but I don't care. We have something very similar to the Reformed Jews. We have New Age Indian Pan-Indianism, where they teach us, oh, well, the only thing that's really important to being an Indian is to make the world a better place. And it's like, that has nothing to do with it. Yeah, you can open up for it. That's why I call it token Alanism, right? Because it's who you are, you're a token at that point. And so you end up with like a group of Native people who literally have no clue what their traditions are, because they've been taught this New Agey nonsense. And
and they genuinely, they believe that that's real tradition, right? Same thing with like some of my Reform friends. They're shocked when I tell them, you know, like on Shabbat, you're supposed to do certain things, because it's really funny. Some of them call me Rabbi Ryan. I'm not even remotely. I would never pretend to be, but I pay attention. So when I'm with a religious family for Shabbat, I ask questions like, why is it some of you do the washing your hands 3 times, and I've seen other people only do it once each hand? Like I asked Gabriel tonight, why is it some of you cut the bread once before you cut all the bread? You know, I have another friend that rips the bread and throws it at you. But yeah, so you know, you guys have lots of these other little traditions. Those, like, you learn those, and some people don't learn them, and they don't understand what they're missing out. Like they think, okay, well, I'm Jewish because I say I'm Jewish, and I go to this temple and we sing songs. But then they come here, and sometimes they feel alienated because you guys are singing the same song, but in a different tune. And then they feel like, whoa, like, I thought we were all Jews. And it's like, well, you are, but you know, some of the stuff you learn maybe isn't as authentic as it needs to be. Maybe by coming here, you hope that they would go home saying, no, I want to learn a little better. Because traditions are important, and authenticity is vital.
Can I take that question to the next level? How then important is for us, again, looking now at the Jewish people as an indigenous people, the land of Israel, our indigenous homeland where we have sovereignty, as an indigenous people, how important then it is as the people and a governance for our people that there be some form of that tradition at the governance level for...
What's the point? Like, if this is not a Jewish country, what's the point of having a country on your ancestral land? It could have been in Uganda, right? Like, it could have been next year in Kampala. So, like, you're here. You're here for a reason. So, if you're not going to have, like, look, I know it comes right down to the left and likes to believe you have to choose between democracy and being Jewish. That's not true. But the truth is, like, traditional Jewish method of governance would actually be a kritarch, which is kind of what you have now, but not a good one, right? You have judges ruling the country, and it's not really good. But like your traditional mode of governance will have judges, but it would have judges that were selected on merit. It would have judges that knew the Torah. It will have judges that are respected and understand Jewish people and Jewish thought, right? So yeah, it's important for this country to be Jewish. Otherwise, why bother? Why would you have a country? I wouldn't support, I'll be honest, I wouldn't support an Israel that wasn't Jewish. I wouldn't support an Israel like if the PA took over, God forbid, you know, it would never happen, but if they took over tomorrow, I wouldn't be pro-PA. Like, I'm pro-Jewish people. I'm pro the idea of Israel as a Jewish country, not a country for the Jews, but a Jewish country. It needs to be that. And it needs people like you. Like, that's the whole thing. It doesn't need people to walk around saying, well, I'm Jewish. It needs people to manifest that. Otherwise, there's no point. Sorry, that was really opinionated. That kind of came off. Sorry. Anyway, so is that it? Anybody have any questions? Is this late?
Forgive me for the last question. The importance of indigenousness, of passing on to the next generation. Again, Jewish, non-Jewish, Jewish, Métis. How do we answer the challenge of passing on with that understanding to the next generation and further generations?
Yeah. Well, you guys are going to have an easier time with it, right? Because you're on your ancestral land. You take them to places that should be really easy to explain to them that this is. You go to Hebron and you show them this is where your grandparents is, right? This is where centuries and centuries of Jewish people lived and died for you to be here. Like they didn't live and die so you could play PlayStation. They lived and died so you could be Jewish on a Jewish ancestral land, so you could be here. Right? It's vital for these young people. They need to understand that they're Jews. This is where you live. This is where you're from. This is who you are. Identity isn't who you want to be. I know that the modern people, that's what they tell you, is that you can be whatever you want. The truth is your identity is who you are. And that's a massive part of it. Being indigenous is who you are. You don't choose it. I mean, and the sad thing is, you can choose not to. You can choose to be like everybody else. You can choose to be part of the mainstream. You can choose to be one of the colonizers. You can choose that. But I would really hope that they'll understand how silly that is. You guys have such an amazing heritage. My people have an amazing heritage. I'm sad when I see Native kids that want to be like. I'm sad when I see Jewish kids that just want to be like everybody else. I want them to understand it's important for you to be who you are. The world would be a way less vibrant place if there were no Indians and no Jews. In my opinion.